Okay, this video here is going to go over uh, exercise 2C and D. So we're going to go over serous membranes and the abdominopelvic regions and quadrants. So we're going to be on page 5 of your labeling handout. So we're at the bottom of page 5 where it talks about 2C serous membranes. So that's where we're picking up. Let's go ahead and click on that and jump into serous membranes. This is also going to be something that you're going to need to know for if you're in my lecture course as well. So what are serous membranes? What are we talking about here? So most organs are going to be covered with a thin membrane. This is going to be called a serous membrane. So it's there for protection. So your organs just aren't randomly scattered in your abdominal cavity or in your thoracic cavity. They're actually covered by a thin layer of connective tissue. It's called a serous membrane. Now, the thing about these serous membranes is there are two layers, okay? You've got an inner layer, which is touching the organ, and you've got an outer layer, which is kind of attaching the organ to the wall of the body, inside wall of the body. So the layer that's actually covering the surface of the organ, whatever organ that may be, could be the heart, could be the lungs, that's going to be the visceral layer. That is going to be what is touching the organ. And then the parietal layer is going to be what's kind of attaching that to the inside wall of the body cavity. So you're going to have two layers. Now, between these two layers, you're going to have a space. Between the visceral layer and the parietal layer, there's going to be a space there. This is a fluid-filled space. The name of the fluid that is found in this space is called serous fluid. That's the name of the fluid that's between the two layers. So it's a fluid-filled cavity. And the purpose of this serous fluid is to prevent friction when the organ is moving. So it's beating in its space or it's expanding and contracting like the lungs in its space. So these organs move and you don't want them like bumping up against the inside wall of the body or bumping up against another organ. So you have this fluid filled space, this fluid filled cavity that surrounds the organ to prevent friction, to prevent it from rubbing up against other organs and structures. So when we're talking about the serous membrane surrounding the heart, again, we've got two layers. So anytime you hear the word pericardium, that should give you a clue. Hey, we're talking about the heart. Now, you have got your layer this is the first box on your labeling handout. So we're looking at this top box right here. Sorry, I don't have a letter on it. That is going to be the visceral pericardium. So if I were to show you this image of the heart, okay, so if I were to show you that, and you've got this line pointing to that layer right there, which is on the surface of the heart, because it's on the surface, you know it's visceral, and because it's around the heart, you're going to say pericardium. So your answer for that would be visceral pericardium. Now next, that next little arrow there is pointing to the space between the two layers. That is called the pericardial cavity. Pericardial cavity. It's the fluid-filled cavity between the two layers. And the outermost layer, that serous membrane that's on the outermost side, this again connecting to the inside wall of the body there, is the parietal pericardium. Parietal because it's the outside layer, pericardium because it is surrounding the heart. So what you have here is this picture of a person like putting their fist through a balloon, just to kind of give you an idea about how the two layers formed around the heart. Just that's all that is. Just kind of trying to give you a visual of how that works. Okay, so this picture right here, pretty cool picture. You're going to be able to see this when you dissect the rat. The rat's heart will be surrounded in it looks like a thin layer of saran wrap, to be honest. So this scalpel here is lifting up, and the fluid, you can kind of see a little bit of the fluid there inside. That is the pericardial fluid. But the scalpel is kind of lifting up that parietal pericardium. Now, you can't touch the visceral pericardium because it's on the surface of the heart. So this is the layer that's actually going to connect to that outside wall. This right here, the next picture that you see, you can kind of see the heart within that pericardial sac there. And you can see there's a lot of fluid between the two layers. This is not a good thing. That is too much fluid around the heart, and it's actually constricting the heart. Of course, the organism's dead here, but it's constricting the heart from being able to do its job, beat productively. So it can't do it because it's filled with fluid. It's the fluid is creating so much pressure that it can't work. So obviously, this organism is not a living organism here. Um, Now, let's take a look at the lungs. So this is going to be the next picture there on your labeling handout. Lungs are pleura. So when you hear that, you're like, okay, that's pleura. That means lungs. So we're kind of doing this a little backwards here. So we're looking first at the inside layer that is touching the surface of the lung. If it's doing that, if that's that layer that's touching the surface of the organ, then that is visceral. And it's on the surface of the lung. So we're going to use the word pleura. So that layer is referred to as the visceral pleura. The outermost layer, which is again touching kind of the wall of the inside thoracic area there, is parietal. And because it's on the surface of the lung, it's called the parietal pleura. And then the space between the two layers is called again, missing that there, is the pleural space. Pleural. So it's the pleural cavity. And it is filled with serous fluid, and it allows the lungs to beat within that membrane without bumping up against the heart. The heart and the lungs are really close together, so you want to make sure they're protected. And if anybody's ever heard of pleurisy, pleurisy is when there's too much fluid between the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura, between those two membranes, and it's actually preventing the lungs from being able to expand the way they should. So the person is short of breath. They can't get a big breath. They can't inhale very much. This is just showing you a little short video of, real brief, about you've got your pleural cavity right here in green, and you've got your lung in red, kind of how that fits. So, and then that's going to form again, your parietal layer and your visceral layer is what that means. And then the space between. Now, the peritoneum is referring to organs within the abdominal cavity, abdominopelvic cavity. This is going to be at the top of page 6 of your labeling handout. So I did put on there red line, blue line, yellow area on your labeling handout because, again, if it's a black and white image, you can't really see that very well. So anytime we're referring to the organs in that area, we're just calling it collectively peritoneum because you've got liver and stomach and kidneys and stuff like that. So there's more to it than what I'm telling you. So you'll learn when you go further on in your studies that there's a little bit more to this, but we're just going to learn the foundation information on this. So collectively, the organs are called the peritoneum. And each of these organs is surrounded by a connective tissue membrane. So the blue line, if you notice, I don't know which one I did first. Oh, I did the blue line first. Very good. The blue line is touching the surface of the organs. So if it's touching the surface, then we're going to use the word visceral for that, right? Peritoneum. If it's the red line, which is the outer area, which is touching the inside wall of the body cavity, that is the parietal peritoneum. And the fluid-filled space between the two layers, which is represented in yellow, is the peritoneal cavity. And this is fluid. I mean, there's fluid here. So when you go to dissect your rat and you cut it open and you're like, where's all this fluid coming from? It's probably peritoneal fluid. Okay, serous fluid found in the peritoneal cavity. What you're seeing here is actually a fetal pig that has been dissected by the Anatomy 2 students. And you can see the heart right up here. You can see that it looks like it's covered by some saran wrap, which that is your pericardial sac that the heart is sitting in. And I don't know how the heck they did it. I really don't. You've got the lungs right here that they're kind of pulling up so you can kind of see. I really don't know how they did this without cutting this. But this plasticky looking like stuff right here, this is the parietal peritoneum. So they're going to need to cut that. Those organs are within that sac. They're going to need to cut that. And when they do, there's going to be fluid that's going to come out from everywhere. That peritoneal fluid is going to come out. Okay, so what is the purpose again of serous fluid? It's produced by the membranes. So the visceral and parietal layers that's a tissue. It's made up of cells, and they're producing this serous fluid. And the job is to reduce friction between the organ and whatever it is it's up against. Now, the next section, we're going to go ahead and continue on with part D. We're now on the bottom of page 6 on your labeling handout. We're going to take a look at dividing that abdominopelvic area up into 9 regions or 4 quadrants. So you can either divide it up into regions or quadrants. Most of the time, I would say you're probably going to be dealing with quadrants instead of regions. Regions narrows it down a little bit, right? So if someone says, hey, I've got a problem over here in this region, you're like, oh, okay, I know exactly where that is. Most patients come in and say, my stomach hurts. And when they say that, they could be referring to any of this in here. They don't even know, it just, the whole bottom, the whole abdominal pelvic area hurts. So they may be able to pinpoint, but they're not going to be able to pinpoint it down to a region. They might be able to pinpoint it down to what quadrant is bothering them. So that's why I say you're probably going to be using quadrants more. Now, if you're going into the surgical field, of course, you would probably narrow that down a little bit more into regions. But if you're dealing with patients, talking to them, it's probably going to be more of a quadrant issue. So if you need to know your 9 different regions, these are your 9 different regions. Whoops, sorry. And you're going to need to fill this in on your labeling handout. How would I ask that on the test? Well, I wouldn't give you any of these words. I would probably say on the test, name, let me get my pen back again. I don't know what happened there. Name that region. I'll put a little question mark right there and ask you to name that region. Or I would say, name that quadrant right there. So that's how I would ask the question on the test. So the very center, if you're looking at, it's a tic-tac-toe board. Okay. So the very center, the one everybody wants, is the umbilical region. So just for orientation here, your belly button is at the very center of that umbilical region, if that kind of gives you some bearings as to where you're at. So coming up here, again, remember we're dealing with the patient's right and the patient's left. So these directional terms are going to make a difference. So going across the page here, working on the rows instead of the columns. So we've got the right hypochondriac region. So if the question on the test says name the region, then you would say right hypochondriac region, not right hypochondriac, right hypochondriac region. I know it's kind of redundant when I ask you to name the region and you have to include the word region in your answer, but you do. As we move across the row, the center top is going to be the epigastric region. Epi means above or on top of. Gastric is referring to the stomach. Well, if you look at where if you look at where the stomach is, let me get a different color here. If you look at where the stomach is, all this is stomach. This box is sitting pretty much above the stomach. So that's why it's the epigastric region. Oops, I keep doing that. And then as you go across that row, then you're in the left hypochondriac region. Okay, as you go down to the center row, you've got your right lumbar region. If you kind of look at how this person is, where they're at, if you remember, lumbar is going to be that lower back. So if you kind of follow that area around, you would be in the lower back region of the person. So that's going to be the right lumbar region. The center, like we said, is the umbilical region. And then you have your left lumbar region. You do need to include the directional terms. And then as you go to the bottom row, going across, you've got your right iliac region, which is, if you look, this is your femur bone right here. This is about where your leg attaches to your body. So you're looking at that bend right there where your leg attaches. So that's where that is. Then you've got your hypogastric region, which is kind of below your digestive stuff. Hypo means below. And then you have your left iliac region, which again is going to be kind of the bend of that leg right there. Now, if you divide the body up into your 4 quadrants, again, remembering your right from your left. So the right upper quadrant, you're looking at this as like an XY axis. So the center, the origin of that XY axis is going to be the belly button. So you've got your right upper quadrant. No, you cannot put RUQ. You have to put right upper quadrant. So the right and left words come first. They did so on this right here. Left came first, right came first. So on the quadrants, that's the same. So right is going to come before the word upper. Left is going to come before the word upper. So your right and left come first when you're talking about these. So right upper quadrant, and then as you go across, left upper quadrant. Then the bottom one would be the right lower quadrant, and then the other one would be your left lower quadrant. So you cannot use your abbreviations. You have to spell out all three words. And there are exercises on your Moodle page for this as well. And that ends the exercise 2 information for Lab Practical 1.